Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. A couple of other notes here from Washington. The Obama regime is using the Espionage Act of 1917 against various whistleblowers in the federal government. Now, you're in a wilderness of mirrors with these things, but you got to figure that one of the reasons for having the WikiLeaks limited hangout operation is that you can then stage a backlash against that and impose draconian police state measures under the cover of WikiLeaks, which was the CIA to begin with. And we have the trial of a former National Security Agency official by the name of Thomas Drake. And they were trying to prosecute him, the Obama Justice Department, Eric Holder, trying to prosecute him under the outrageous, unconstitutional Espionage Act of 1917. This, of course, goes back to that last hypocrite, warmonger, Democratic professor president, Woodrow Wilson, similarly race-obsessed and ultimately reactionary, a puppet in those days of Morgan. Woodrow Wilson, the puppet of Morgan, and we know this because Theodore Roosevelt was used to get Woodrow Wilson into power and not Taft. He was a beneficiary of a Morgan manipulation of the electoral system. So that's what the law is. The Espionage Act of 1917, sponsored by Woodrow Wilson and the House of Morgan, is being used against this guy Thomas Drake. Now, who knows what he was, but the government has now essentially withdrawn their case. Their case has collapsed because they don't want to show the classified material, which had been the basis of the prosecution. But in the meantime, in the course of this, the Obama administration is currently running 5 cases, 5, under the Espionage Act of 1917. Bradley Manning, now Bradley Manning, we know, is being crucified because Julian Assange, the head of the WikiLeaks CIA limited hangout operation, is living like the king in the English country house of that British officer with some hypothesis of military intelligence connections of some sort. So Bradley Manning has to be crucified. Yeah, again, you don't know who Bradley Manning is, but I'm saying we should not have the Espionage Act of 1917 being used against any of these people. This is now using WikiLeaks to impose a police state, and we don't want it. Stephen Kim, former State Department analyst accused of leaking to a television reporter, and Jeffrey Sterling, a former CIA analyst accused of leaking information to New York Times reporter James Risen. So Obama, the oppressor, precisely in the footsteps of the warmonger and race-obsessed Morgan puppet, Wall Street puppet, Woodrow Wilson. Now, the European Union may regulate derivatives. It may have clearinghouses for over-the-counter derivatives and reportability for the exchange-traded derivatives. Let's see. The banks have failed to block the possible reduction of the swipe fee, showing that the bank lobby is not as powerful as it had been. And we've got the House Republicans trying to delay Dodd-Frank. This is funny because Dodd-Frank already has built-in delays of up to a decade or more. The Republicans are saying it's coming too fast. Let's look at the theoretical question, though, underneath this Chinese economic issue. China. How does China do so well? Well, they use the American system. They're Hamiltonians. They have Friedrich List. They've studied Japan. They've studied the Taiwan experience, and a lot of that is borrowed from the U.S. American system. They're dirigists, they're mercantilists, they are protectionists. That's the economic miracle. You want an economic miracle? You get those. They have a controlled currency. They have capital controls. They have state-run credit. They have an industrial policy. They have indicative planning. And their industrial policy is not Kurzarbeit in the German industrial policy, which is simply to manage the poverty, right, to distribute the poverty. Here's an interesting article. The Philadelphia Inquirer of Tuesday, June 7th. We have a guy called Stephen Conn, C-O-N-N, a professor at the Ohio State University, and he writes about China's state-fueled growth. not a free market, but state dirigism, protectionism, and mercantilism, cameralism, if you like it. He's been to China. He has ridden in the maglev. The maglev goes 143 miles an hour from Shanghai to from Pudong in the Shanghai to the airport. It's the only commercial one in the world. U.S. politicians rail against the Chinese threat, writes Steve Conn, C-O-N-N. What they don't mention as often is that China's economic success directly contradicts the free market orthodoxy of American conservatives, reactionaries. Under the conservative economic theory, China's booming economy simply cannot exist. A visit to China quickly reveals that its economy is being built not by the miracle of the free market and the private sector alone, but also by public spending on a huge scale. And he says, I won't even mention the fact that key sectors of the Chinese economy, such as the big banks, are controlled by the state. They're state-run enterprises. There's a significant, large public sector. And with that, they got through 2007, 2008 better than most other countries. What you see is the importance of spending in infrastructure of all kinds. Now, let me just digress for a second. We have Ken Cuccinelli, the lunatic reactionary attorney general of the state of Virginia, is trying to stop the extension of the Washington subway, the metro, to Dulles Airport. Dulles Airport is the large international airport that serves the capital of the United States. Everybody has an interest in this. This is the capital of your country. You want to have a decent, dignified subway leading from the main international airport of the capital of your country into the downtown of the capital of your country. But this tin-horn, two-bit reactionary from rural Virginia with his lunatic base says, no, that's communism and socialism. I can't have the metro reaching to Dulles Airport. Now, let's get back to the article by Professor Kahn. Shanghai has grown so fast over recent decades that it could have been clogged by the population, but they're getting around thanks to an efficient subway system and a network of huge roads that the government has provided. Most major Chinese cities are being connected to each other by high-speed trains. Air travel is now better. They are building airports, quite a few of them, which would outpace any airport in the United States. So we have investment in public transport. We also have 25 nuclear reactors that are being built. Chinese universities and research institutions are already big, and they are growing rapidly because the government is investing heavily in education. Compare this to the wretched United States, where all education budgets are under savage attack to fund more bailouts, more tax cuts for the rich, imperialist wars, and other lunatic policies. I'm embroidering a little bit on this underlying text. Government spending is the key. Chinese economy has taken off because the Chinese are doing what Americans used to do, making large-scale public investments to stimulate and foster the private market. We Americans, once upon a time, used to build railroads and highways. We used to fund our education system generously, making it the envy of the world. Now we don't. In the last 30 years, U.S. economic policy has shifted away from public investment and towards enriching big corporations and wealthy individuals through tax breaks and giveaways. Those are the job producers that the Republicans talk about all the time. So U.S. budgets of state universities are being gutted. The Chinese are growing. There is no doubt about who will win the future. And you're going to wake up in 2025 with the Chinese on the moon and the U.S. nowhere, wallowing in the mud of this lunatic free market demagogic system. So that's the report for this week, and we will see you next week. Keep in touch, of course, on Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net, and Webster G. Tarpley on Twitter. See you next week.